Hi guys, welcome to the A to Z of Python, day 3, and it's going to mean letter C, which is CSV, and today that's what we're going to talk about. So what is a CSV file? Well, it's just a way to read and write data or some sort of information to a text file that's separated. Each item is separated by a comma, and if you've seen these, you'll know that maybe you open a CSV file in Excel and it constructs it as a spreadsheet because each CSV file contains commas generally to separate each item, and then some sort of new line character to indicate a new row altogether. And using this standardized format, it's easy to read and write documents with Python or to pull data from the web and open it in, say, Python or Excel or something like that. So I'm going to go over what this looks like. We'll do a few practice examples, and hopefully by the end of it you'll have the basics that you need to get started adding CSV functionality to your own applications. So the very first thing that you have to do is import the CSV module, and it's that simple. Import CSV, and that'll give you the read and write functionality that we're looking for. First thing that we want to do is talk about how do you write to a CSV file. Well, CSV reads and writes all start with a similar command, and that's with open. And you'll notice that there's quite a few arguments that it takes. We only need a couple, and the one that's going to be required for every single one that you do is the actual name of the CSV file. And if this file does not exist, it will be created when you run this function. So we'll just call it testfile.csv, and this file will be created wherever your script is located. So wherever you execute the script from, that's where the file goes to. So if you need to open it up later, that's where you'll look. Then we need to talk about what our method for manipulating this data will be, and that can be a read, a write, an append. There's a couple. Those are the three that you'll probably use the most. The first one we're going to do is write, which is the mode is W, and so we're opening a testfile.csv for writing within Python, and we're going to tell it that what's called a new line is just going to be essentially like a blank space. So when the file is being written, it will just kind of include that blank space, and that will tell whatever program you're using to open it up that, hey, when you see this, kick on over. You can kind of put anything you want in there as a new line indicator. You just have to make sure that when you're importing your CSV file that you tell your application that, hey, we've chosen this particular character to be indicator for a new line, and it'll be able to construct your document just fine. So if you're using Python 3.5, this is the preferred approach in my opinion. And then we'll open it as, and then some sort of file name. I'm just going to use F, keep it simple. This can be anything you want, any kind of descriptive term that you want. F is nice and simple. And then we need to initialize the actual writer itself, so we'll set some variable, which in this case I'll just use A. You can again use any descriptive name that you want, and we'll do csv.writer, and the first argument is the file itself. So since we've set that as F, we're going to set this as F, and we can put a delimiter in there, and that will equal a comma. So what this is telling us is, hey, when you go to write the data, write it here to this file and separate each value with a comma. And this is a standard delimiter option. It is a comma separated value file after all. You can put anything in here that you want. Again, when you read it, you have to tell it to anticipate something if it's different. So if you use an odd character of some sort or a letter, you need to tell your application like Excel what your delimiter is when you open the CSV file before it tries to build the actual spreadsheet. So now that we've done that, we can go about writing our data to our file. So I'm just going to do a.write row, and I'm just going to write a range of numbers from 0 to 9. So we use the range function, And when we run this, we have a new file called testfile.csv, and it contains just a range of numbers from 0 to 9, each one separated by a comma, and that's to be expected. So this is literally, in my opinion, the most basic example, and this is enough to get you going writing your new text CSV files in your own application just by sort of emulating this. And if you want to give more descriptive names, you can, but you don't have to. I think anybody who reads this will understand what you're doing. So in this right row function here, you notice that we put a range, and we can try to pass different stuff to this. So let's say I want to put just the number 1, for example, and I say, okay, open this file and write the number 1 to it, and I run this. I'm going to get an error. It says iterable expected, not an integer. And what that means is the CSV writer only writes iterable objects to the file, and that means an integer is not iterable. What we need is some sort of list or a dictionary, something that can hold multiple values. It's looking for like an object of some sort. So if I were just to simply put 1 in a list and run it, it would perform what we would expect. So if you want to just manually tell it what to write, you can. You can put whatever you want in there, doesn't matter. Run that, and there you go. So if you're going to be using like a for loop, for example, and you're going to be writing, say, a counter or something like that, you need to make sure that it's nestled inside of these brackets so that it treats it as an object, not as a string or as an integer. So let's just change this back to the way that we had it. So this is only good if you're creating a new file, and because the mode is W, it will literally overwrite the file over and over and over again. And in some cases that may be desirable, but if it's like a log file or something like that, you really don't want to overwrite the existing data. You would probably prefer to append that data to the document. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another example. We're going to use the same file name, but instead of using mode W, we're going to use mode A, and that's for append, and we're going to use the same new line, and everything else will be basically the same. Okay, so in fact, I can just copy this, save us all a few seconds here. And I'm going to try something a little bit different. I'm going to do for I in range 10. And so what I'm doing is, instead of having the range function create a list that's written as a row, I'm going to go through a loop here and write one number at a time. Okay, so what will happen, if you can imagine, this is going to write the numbers horizontally in a row, and I would like to write the values vertically in one column, and this is how you'll do that. I'm going to do a.write row. You might be tempted to put I here. Okay, so after each write row function, the new line is sort of there by default. So if you were to call several write rows in a row, and you opened it in a spreadsheet, or you opened it back up in Python and printed it out, it would actually, each write row call that you do will be on its own separate line. Okay, and so since we're going to be running this particular function 10 times here because of the range 10, we're going to get 10 different rows, and with each time just the number, the integer, whatever the count is, getting written. But again, we can't just put the integer in there. We need to put it inside a list object in order to do that. Now if I run this, you'll see that we have the first function is writing the range horizontally, And the second function is using a loop to write one line at a time. And these are separated by just like a blank space. It's kicking down to a new line, and that's what it looks like. So that's how you would write horizontally, just all the files going into a row, and this is how you would write vertically, as in each particular file goes into its own row. So you can use a combination of these to construct a grid. So if you have quite a few columns that are holding different types of data, you can write one row at a time, and you can just have like a loop of write row functions that can write. So if I had here, if I did range 10 in here, it would actually do 10 rows, 10 columns, and write it in a grid pattern. So you can kind of use these any way you want, but that's the standard approach. And one is just a single write that will overwrite everything that's already there or create a new document, and one will append to whatever's already there. So now that we've learned how to write and append documents, the next step, I think, is to actually read the CSV file and do something with the information. So let's give that a shot. So again, we'll do with open, I'm going to do test file, and there is a mode called R, which is for read. However, in Python 3.5, it is implied, meaning that if you leave that particular argument out, it will assume read by default. So you can put it in, but you don't have to, and I like that. So we're just going to leave that particular argument blank, and it'll default to read. And we'll just do new line. Okay, and these match, so we're reading it the way we wrote it so that we won't have any surprises. And that sort of opens the file up, initializes everything, and we can begin. So we're going to do a equals csv.reader, which is a little different, and we'll put f in there. And that should be good. So we've got that in there, and let's do for row in a print row. So that's going to open the file for reading, loop through every single row, and print the contents of the row. And there you have it. So it looks just like the file. So that's great. All right, so that's pretty cool if you're just writing, say, lists of numbers or something like that. But what if you have some types of data and you want to write specific types? Well, there's a couple of things that you'll need to do. First of all, you may want a header field in your, like, especially if you're going to open it in a spreadsheet. A header would be quite nice. And you need to pass maybe a dictionary to the CSV writer to contain different types of data. So let's see what this looks like. So let's do with open, and we'll just call this one pets. All right, so this will be a separate file here at this point. And we'll do for writing, and same new line, and that's as f. And we'll create some sort of variable. I'm going to call it field names. That's just from the standard example in the Python documentation. And we're going to create a list of field names. Now this will be the very first row in your CSV file, and if you were to open it in, say, Excel, for example, it would interpret that as a header row with no other data there, just, you know, names for the headers. That's it. And we'll put in, let's say, animal type, and let's put pet name. So that is our list for our field names, and we'll go ahead and get ready to write that in here. So CSV, we're going to do something called a dict writer. It's a dictionary writer, and we're going to put the file and we have something called field names. It's an argument we can put in here. And our field names will equal whatever this variable is called. In this case, to keep it simple, it's called field names. So now it knows, hey, we're opening this file to write, but we have field names that we need to account for here. That's really the main difference. And then instead of writer, we're using dict writer so that we can pass a Python dictionary as a row. And you'll see how that works here. So we'll begin by a.writeHeader, and that will push the header names into the CSV file, and then we'll go to the more traditional write row. And inside of here, we will construct a dictionary. Now you could construct this through a loop of some sort if you have a ton of data, but since we're just doing this for a demonstration, I'm going to manually create a dictionary. I will do a couple of them. So I'll do animal type. So this will match your header names. Okay, so the field names need to be the same. And we're going to call this a cat. And let's give it a name. Sniffles. Sniffles sounds like a good cat name. And we'll do another one. Same thing here. And this one will be a dog. And we'll call this Sir Barks a lot. One more. Why not? And we'll do a turtle for all you turtle fans out there. And we'll give it a name. We'll call it Crush. Okay, pretty cool turtle name. So let's see what happens. Now we have a new file called pets, and there you go. So we have animal type, pet name, and then we have our corresponding values. And we could open this in Excel, and you can see that it constructs it just fine. Puts our header names in here, and it separates them exactly the way you would expect. So this is great. So far, so good. So how do we read that? Let's give it a shot. We'll open it as pets.csv and new line. Remember, we don't have to put the mode R in there because that is it's assumed to be R if you leave it blank. So we're going to do a csv.dictReader. Okay, so this is different. So we can do CSV reader here, but this is not constructed in the same manner. Because we know we have written them as dictionaries, we're going to read them in as dictionaries. Put the file in there, and we'll just add like a header that prints to give our users an indication of what this is. So we'll just say pet names, and for row in A, and we'll do print. And we're going to reference this by the dictionary key, just like you would expect if you're familiar with that. If not, watch the array video that I did, the very first one in this series. You'll get some insight there. So there's one key, and let's put a dash in here just so it looks pretty when it prints out. And we'll do the other key, and that should do it. So what this is going to do is it's going to loop through the CSV file, and it's going to read in the sets of dictionaries. It's going to print out a header called pet names, and for every single row that we have, which there are 3, okay, for every row it's going to print the animal type and the pet name. So it's going to print these corresponding values. So let's run that. And there you go. So pet names, cat sniffles, dog sir barks a lot, and turtle crush. There you go. So these several methods here should be enough to get you going. Again, this is for Python 3, not 2. Some of the syntax is a little bit different, and you have to be wary of that when you're doing that. So again, this is designed for the newest version of Python. So keep that in mind if you're going to download this and try it yourself. So hopefully that's enough to get you going. And as always, thanks a lot, and we'll see you